Just give me a thumbs up. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Crew Chats. We are back for another month. We were online middle of May when we did our post-summit review. So, I'm Jules. I'm the moderator for today. Our session is all about GDPR. I have lots of questions, and so we'll go over that. But first off, bit of housekeeping. If you've missed any previous episodes, you can check them out on YouTube. You can look in the community. This will be posted up as a blog in the community. Obviously, any questions, please do let us know. If you have any questions during the episode, either tweet us and use the hashtag CrewChats. Someone will hopefully be keeping an eye on that. So a couple of speaker intros. We'll just go through everyone. So like I said, I'm Jules James. I'm an assistant professor of marketing at St Edward's University. And then we'll give it over to Joe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Reitz. I am the global technical trainer at AWS.
And then next on to, I forgot to say, what are your fun summer plans? Oh. And I did have that before. Just a caveat, I had this question written down before we just had our champion call. And Deborah asked exactly the same question. So anyway, summer plans, Joe.
Well, you got to say yours first.
Oh, yeah, mine. Well, mine wasn't really very fun, but hopefully doing a road trip, driving up to Mount Rushmore via Cadillac Ranch, Denver, visit the Purple Machine, possibly, and then down through Wichita, because that was the only name I recognized on the route down to Dallas.
My wife was actually born in Wichita.
Oh, really?
That's all I know about it.
Oh, well, let's see what it's like. A couple of days in Dallas and then back home.
Sounds fun.
So that is my summer plans.
Yeah, it's really cool when you get to Rushmore and you just walk down. There's like flags going down both sides. You walk up to it, and it's like, it's big.
Yeah.
Yeah. My summer plans involve, I've been trying to convince Hallie that we need to own a boat now that we live in the Pacific Northwest. So I've recalibrated my expectations, though, and we're no longer going to buy a 30-foot sailboat. I'm working on her to buy a about 15-foot kayak. So that's my plan.
And is that going to be tandem or single?
we went canoeing once together early on in our relationship. This is going to be 2 single kayaks, I believe.
That might be safer. So Rico.
Hi, Rico DeLeon. I'm the Marketing Automation Manager at AMRI. And summer plans is to find a pool and try not to sweat too much.
Hard work in Texas.
And then Jeff.
So Jeff Krajewski here, Manager of Marketing Automation at AmeriCorps Registry.
Cool. Summer plans.
Summer plans. Let's see. Again, try and stay cool like you guys. Hopefully get out on the water between fishing and boating.
Cool. Okay. And then Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen DiMaria. I'm a Senior Manager of Client Services at Digital Pie, and my summer plans involve pretty much renovating my entire house and then hopefully going camping a whole lot more this year. That's something that I wanted to do a lot last summer, and it just never happened. So this year, that's my goal.
Awesome. And I can see that we've just had Smugs join as well.
Hi,
so Sydney, do you want to do your intro, and what are your summer plans?
Yes. Hi, I'm Sydney. I'm a marketing technology consultant at Atumos. And my summer plans are, well, my biggest summer plan was moving to New York City, which I did 2 weeks ago today, 2 weeks in New Yorker. And this weekend is my birthday. So big birthday plans. That's pretty much it. No major vacations.
Cool. How old are you going to be? Make us cry.
I'm going to be 47.
I'm making fun of the old people.
Cool. So yeah, that was obviously our intros. So obviously with GDPR is in full swing, and I'm hoping most people have recovered from May 25th, which was the big day of reckoning. I personally have got a lot of questions about GDPR because I've been quite lucky that I've been sat outside all of the issues. I've just kind of been watching the mayhem that most of you have had to deal with. So I've got some questions. I'm sure some of them are going to be really easy to answer. Some of you may not by heart. But these are questions I kind of either see a lot in community or I get asked by a couple of people. So first one, hopefully a simple one. If it can be explained in a couple of sentences, or if you can boil it down into one, I don't know. But what exactly is GDPR and how does it affect the use of Marketo? Anyone?
I
Crickets.
think that we should start this entire conversation by saying that none of us are lawyers, nor can we provide you legal advice. And any application of GDPR is at the sole consent of your company and your legal team. And you should not take anything we tell you and decide that that makes you legally compliant with the GDPR.
Wow, there you go.
Mugs.
Someone knows that off by heart.
I could take a stab at a high level of GDPR. So GDPR is an acronym. It stands for, I hope I don't butcher this, the General Data Protection, Data Regulation, General Protection, something like that. Yeah. Basically, it is just for the EU, for the countries that are in the European Union, and it outlines how businesses can use/store your data and what level of consent you have to provide for the storage, use of your data, and email communications. It's like Castle, only more strict and maybe more scary.
Yeah. Anyone else got any more a bigger explanation of it, or is that? I've heard like the right to be forgotten. I've heard that a lot of times.
Yeah,
what's that all about?
That's the big thing that's scarier than Castle. Like Castle, when we, I think we did a chat like a little over a year ago on Castle, and when we did the last chat, it was like, oh, that was cute. We were talking about Castle, and now it's GDPR. Castle was very much like a movement towards explicit opt-in, right? Versus the right to be forgotten and like having to prove that you've expunged someone from your entire database if they ask you to is quite a big ask. So that's basically what it is, though. Is if someone doesn't want to be in your any of your systems, you have to be able to essentially prove in some way that you've removed them and provide them a record of here's where we had all of your information, here's everything we had, and you are no longer in any of our systems.
And it comes down to personalized data. It's data that you can tie directly to the person, so you can take their direct information out of it. As long as it's not able to be tied back to that particular person, you can use it for marketing generalization purposes, for reporting and trends. But you want to make sure, again, that you're purging all direct ties to that person out of your databases.
So is it as simple as if someone sends you an email or whatever and says, delete me from your records, is it as simple as just going into Marketo, finding their record and hitting delete? Or is it more involved in that? Depends on how many systems you have.
I think it depends on the process that, again, should be outlined in conjunction with your legal team. But if someone's asking you to delete their information, yes, you should certainly delete it from all systems where you're storing their information. But there are, I've seen interpretations of GDPR that require you to store certain pieces of information that maintain that you had their explicit opt-in at one point in time or had their explicit opt-out at one point in time, just so you can prove that you had that. But I have not made a recommendation to keep that information in Marketo. I've always made the recommendation to keep that stored outside of Marketo in a data warehouse or something, and completely delete the record from Marketo.
Okay, cool. So
I think go ahead, Joe.
It's something like you have the right to retain someone's information if you have explicit consent for as long as, how does the language work? It's like as long as there's a business reason for the relationship.
Legitimate interest is the word I've heard.
Yeah, that's the part that gets in a huge gray area, that there are so many different ways I've seen the legitimate business interest interpreted.
Yeah. Because does having a account in some cases satisfy that, or is it like, you've downloaded a piece of content before? Like, I don't know. I think that's thin. But I think we lean on our privacy policy a lot, I think, in terms of like, all of our forms have explicit opt-in.
Yeah.
But it's like a pop-up that like I think everybody must have received hundreds of different emails from every vendor you've ever bought from or been subscribed to of like, hey, just as an update, we've updated our privacy policies circa around May 23rd to 25th. But yeah.
Okay. So, obviously, Smugs mentioned about the EU, the fact that it's an EU only. I've seen a lot of companies who may not necessarily, I've had emails from who I didn't think were EU companies. So is it only relevant to those who deal with people in the EU, or do you think it's a lot of people are trying to take it on just in case something else happens?
I think that there are a couple of different ways to approach it. I certainly think that the rollout of GDPR as a law in the EU is just a foreshadowing of it rolling out in other places in the world. We've already seen it in ANZ, we've seen it in Canada, and I'm sure it's just a matter of time before it rolls out in the US. So I have certainly seen companies that are using this as an opportunity to kind of get ahead of the curve and start soliciting some of those opt-ins that everyone was frantically trying to get right before May 25th. And I think that's great. That's super smart. In the interim, I do think that it's not a bad thing to try to apply these laws as loosely as you can. So don't apply GDPR to people who aren't in the EU. You don't legally have to, again, under your legal team's guidance. I wouldn't necessarily recommend applying GDPR laws to people in the US right now while you don't have to. I think you're just overly limiting your database. But you should definitely be thinking of a long-term strategy to get your US database to a place where you can become GDPR or explicit opt-in or data privacy, whatever you want to call it, compliant.
Yeah, I've started to see more and more forms like who are are pretty much US only companies, but now I'm starting to see forms where they're now asking, rather than being automatically opted in, they're actually asking for that checkbox, which I think, like you said, moving ahead, who knows what's going to be after GDPR. Wouldn't be surprised if something happens over in the US. We've had obviously Canada, we've had now EU, and obviously Germany with a double opt-in. It's going to happen, and I think Australia is pretty strict with its opt-in policies as well. So
yeah, I mean, to Smuggs' point, like it's kind of a question of future proofing, right? Because we've seen Canada do it. Really, the only places that have implicit opt-in that I can think of off the top of my head are the US and India. Everywhere else either has explicit or double. So future-proofing yourself just makes sense. But then, like, from a tactical standpoint, like, again, agreeing with Smuggs on you don't want to make a US form have to have an explicit opt-in. So, like, we've taken a lot of effort to make all of our forms have like that, when you select your country, there's a dependency, like a field visibility rule for like, if you select UK, the explicit opt-in checkbox comes up and all the appropriate things have to happen after that. If you select US, it's just, hey, fill out the form. We're not going to hit you with that extra GDPR language. But I mean, that can be a massive undertaking, and it underscores again why it's important in an infrastructure like Marketo to have templated forms in Design Studio and not like in every program, and similar for other marketing automation platforms too, I'm sure.
Okay, I mean that leads on a lot to my next question is, obviously we know that it's with thanks to Smuggs' beautiful definition and everything of the legal terms at the beginning. How much responsibility do the MOPS team have? Because obviously we know you have to work with the legal team, and it's based on what your company, where they work and what the company decides to do. So how much responsibility does MOPS have to get all this in place? Is it just get the legal team to say that what needs to be done and then we do it, or should it be in joint conjunction with everyone?
I mean, I've done a lot of the conversations with legal, and my recommendation, best practices, is really partner with legal. I've seen it work really well when you are having, it's a conversation, like you were saying, it's a conversation between you and legal, and you work through things together. In some companies, it's going to be legal telling you this is what you have to do and you have no option. In other companies, it's legal presenting options to marketing and MOPS and working it out together to figure out what works for your business, and also how you can not impact negatively but still be legally compliant to your risk profile, which option is best. So in the most ideal world, best practices, work in partnership with your legal team and have it be a conversation. And I think that's really the best way, so that, and then MOPS or marketing is the one who's implementing. And then obviously if we have any questions, some gray area, for us, for one of the best ways I think is just to work with legal together throughout the entire process from beginning to end. That was actually worked out really well for some clients.
So
and I think I was just going to add in there, one of the things, if you haven't done it yet or you haven't tackled GDPR, from a marketing perspective or MOPS perspective, start looking and auditing your data. All of us that are talking about GDPR had to do that or look at that at some point, because we're going to have those records that aren't opted in that we're going to have to either remove, gain compliance, or now, if we have a business purpose that we're working with them, look to gain that compliance.
Okay, so question then, what if your legal team says, we don't want to do anything with GDPR, and you know that in your database there may be some, you've seen working in MOPS, there's some EU records, or you think, what if in the future even we think we're going to go into the EU at some point, but your legal team basically just says, no, not going to touch it, going to avoid it, we don't need to be like GDPR compliant. As a MOPS person, what should we do? Do we just sit back and say, okay, if we don't need to be compliant, we just leave it at that, or is there anything pushback we should give?
Get it in writing from legal that it's on their head.
Yeah, I actually, I'm sorry, Jen, go ahead.
No, that was pretty much it, because I can't tell you how many people I've heard from like, oh, we don't really do business in the EU, so we're not really bothering. And then like a week later, they're like, oh crap, we have like 20. Yeah, like, so eventually they do have to do it. So just do it. Just because you don't really do business over there doesn't mean that you don't have to comply.
What are the fines for GDPR? It's like, I know
A
the
lot.
Ridiculous.
It's a lot.
It's
A
like
lot.
5, I want to say, is it 5% of your annual turnover?
That's one of the options. Yeah,
Or
there's like
$20
some
million?
flat rate, I think, and then there's another one that's like, the
Yeah.
5%.
There's something like,
And it's whichever is greater of the two.
Yeah.
right, yeah, because it was $500,000.
Worst applicable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whichever has the
This
most
is in the toilet, and we shouldn't take a percentage of your revenue. We're going to get at least this much.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
What I found really interesting was, being on a lot of different client calls and hearing different legal teams, right? Like some tiny companies would bring in outside legal, some companies have their own legal team. I heard everything from here to here. I had one legal team say, well, just block everyone from the EU from coming to your website, and that will solve the problem.
I've seen that happen. I've seen some, is it New York Times?
Yeah, it was one of the
it's
newspapers, and that backfired.
A couple of newspapers. It's bad. That's such a bad business practice.
Yeah.
I'm sure that this is the same for Jess. I'm sure that Jen, this is the same for you. We've all done tons of GDPR implementations at lots of differerent companies, and I don't think I've seen two people interpret it the same way. So
none of them were ever the same.
No, they're all different. They're all very different. I've also had clients that are like, we don't do business in the EU, just delete everyone. Like, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's like you definitely can't sell to the, like, depending on, like, if it's a healthcare business, like, well, you're just never going to be able to sell outside of the US because of the nature of your business. So, you know what? Maybe it's not worth spending a ton of time trying to figure out an explicit opt-in strategy for the EU. Just delete them, and that's fine.
But I think what I hear, because I've done, so obviously we've been talking about GDPR for a really long time. I think there's just some general confusion. And the clarity is there is no law that says you must collect express opt-in, and that is a finite law. I think that's where the confusion is, because there isn't a right or wrong. So I think that's where we're all left in this kind of very amorphous state, right? Because we're marketers, we want like the answer.
Right.
Give us an answer.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing with us. I mean, we're leaning heavily on our legal department because this happened right in the middle of our implementation, so of Marketo. So it's like, where do we start? Where do we begin? And we've realized that the best way to approach this is it didn't end on the 25th. Like, we've had conversations every 2 weeks on like what needs to be changed, what needs to be amended, how do we approach it, because it's constantly changing. I mean, we're in the pharma space, so we have to be very careful about that, especially.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely. I will say, back to your original question, Jules, I did have a friend that was in my user group that his company was like, no, let's just not worry about it. I think that's fine. We can just ignore it. And he was very upset about it, as I'm sure we all would be. Like, this is bad. This is very bad. We should definitely be dealing with this. Why are we not dealing with this? But, it kind of got to a point that was a business decision that his company made, and it's not his company. It's not his life. He's not going to be personally liable if they make a really bad choice and get sued. So I eventually told him he should just step back and enjoy his life and
let the chips fall where they may.
Exactly.
Okay, so I guess my last question is, obviously we've all seen these hundreds of GDPR emails coming through, and I'm sure, like me, you probably haven't opted into any of them. I found it as a really great way to get unsubscribed from all the crap that I get through my emails on a regular basis. So how badly do you think this is going to affect people's databases? I mean, is there an expected rate of how quickly people's databases are going to decline by? Is there like a best practice of how many people you think are going to opt in? Anything like that?
We've operated around, like, I love our legal team. They basically interpret the law for us and say, like, okay, here's what it says. It's up to you guys to determine the business risk, right? So, you know, how conservative do you want to play? And like, we take a super conservative stance when it comes to, like, the most customer obsessed approach, right? So we will suspend folks until we hear, like, so they only get transactional messages from us. Like, you can register for an event and you can still get stuff from us like that, but we're not going to market to you unless you explicitly tell us at some point that you want to receive it. Now, that said, in some countries, it's completely okay that, like, okay, they're a customer, they're using our services, like, we can see that there's that business relationship there, that there's a justification for contacting them, reaching out to them, sending them other marketing promotional offers, and that works. But it's so variable by country. Like, you almost need like a legal team by country if you operate on a truly global scale.
And I think some companies, or some of the clients that I've worked with have taken a global approach, because it's just too much. Like what you were saying, Joe, to go country by country. Okay, we're going to treat Japan this way. We're going to keep Australia this way. You know, every country is different. So in some clients, they've taken, it doesn't matter where you're from, we're going to apply the same policy to everyone, you know, minus Canada and Germany, because those are the most strict. But that's a discussion that you need to have with your legal team.
Okay, so because I've heard of people who they've obviously started sending out the emails, and I mean, they're losing 20, 30, 40, 50% of their database because they're not opting in. So obviously, I know with this whole legitimate interest, that interesting kind of phrase that's getting thrown around a lot, is it expected that pretty much everyone's who has to be GDPR compliant, is it expected that they're going to lose like 20, 30% of the database, or is it? I don't know. It's just a question, because like I say, I've heard people who've lost loads of data and people who have everyone opt in.
I mean, I think people are going to lose their data. Well, not their entire database, obviously. I'm not sure exactly what that percentage was. I can tell you from the opt-in emails that I sent, the responses were pretty terrible. So I think people should expect to lose a portion of what they're used to seeing. I'm not necessarily sure that's a bad thing, because I think people, in my experience, rely a little too heavily on their email platforms for communications. I think it's going to require people to get a little more inventive and maybe a little bit smarter on how they're talking to people. The people that I see who are super concerned about that's emails the main way that they communicate. And there are other methods, and I think it's just going to require them to research those and figure out, you know, do some testing and see which works for them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've definitely seen, I mean, everyone was sending out those opt-in emails at the same time. So as expected, they mostly went ignored. So I've definitely seen like huge portions of clients in media databases get unsubscribed, basically, or wiped out because of that. But just like Jen is saying, you shouldn't, I mean, this is kind of forcing you to get into a better practice of not solely relying on email for your marketing efforts, you know, reaching out and doing more like online advertising or events. I also like to think of it as, I don't know how recently any of you have experienced getting a new email address and it's so nice and pretty for a little while and you're not getting all this junk, and then eventually you realize you're getting all this junk again. Like, they'll come back to you. You'll build up your database over time. People will start downloading your content again, and they'll opt in to receive your emails, and they'll miss you probably if you were sending out good stuff that was relevant. So I think it will be painful in the short term, but long term will make you a more mature marketing department.
And those people,
Go on, Karen, Jess.
I was going to say, and those people probably wasn't going to respond to you anyway. So I think sometimes we rely too much on the total database number instead of the engaged database. So it's kind of helping you because we're doing spring cleaning.
Yeah, I think because I always wonder, do you think people in the EU who are obviously based in the EU only have EU customers, do you think when this GDPR came in, do you think, I wonder if some of them just thought, oh my God, this is the end of email marketing. Like we can't email to anyone anymore. What's the point of doing this type of thing? Or do you think, I mean, for me, having obviously come from the EU, I would have seen it as a perfect way to clean up my database. And if I'm going to lose 50% of my data, then they obviously weren't interested in the first place. But I always wonder if people in the EU have now just gone, what's the point of doing email marketing? We can't contact anyone. It's has it gone the step too far?
Well, two things with that is I did work with one person who basically said, I'm not going to have a job anymore. So we had to like talk him off a ledge. But also the way some people are applying it is GDPR is one thing and then e-privacy is another. So they're continuing to move forward with the way that they were communicating before. They're trying to collect opt-ins, but they're not necessarily suppressing based on their opt-ins until the whole e-privacy thing is figured out like sometime next year. So that's how some people are handling it too. Again, not a lawyer. Don't, just go haywire based on that.
Isn't there a 12 month? Is it 12 months they have to get compliant by? I think I've seen that somewhere. They've said you have 12 months to get in compliance. So basically by 25th of May 2019, if you're not in compliance, that's the point.
And it's weird because cookies are covered as part of both e-privacy and GDPR too. And like, I don't know, all these laws sort of tie together to make it one nice little confusing amalgam of lawyers.
We'll be back here again in 2019 talking about e-data privacy.
Yeah.
Tune in next day.
So one last question. Has anyone got any real quick tips of things that they must do if they want to be GDPR compliant? Obviously, I know we're not a legal team. This is not a legal response, but any MOPS from the MOPS side of things, is there any quick tips that people should do? Put opt-ins on their forms, that kind of thing.
I got one thing that's like this is how I would do it, but it's not wrong to not do it this way. But I've seen a lot of people that are using marketing suspend to opt people out that are not opted in or whatever for GDPR. I've actually been using the unsubscribe field. I think that it is nice to keep the unsubscribe field as reasons you can no longer legally communicate with someone, either because you never had their opt-in in the first place or because they have requested to no longer hear from you. And with an unsubscribed reason of they're being opted out because of GDPR, privacy compliance, whatever you want to call it. And then the marketing suspend field is just reasons that marketing is choosing to no longer communicate with you if you're like a competitor or whatever.
I agree, mostly. I would actually take it a step further and just do the kill it with fire approach and do both, like where you unsub them and marketing suspend. You have reasons for both, reason fields for both, and then that way it's like
unsub them, unsub reason GDPR, marketing suspend reason GDPR.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. Just so there's no doubt. And like in some instances, what I've seen some folks do is like salespeople have the ability to unsubscribe someone directly in Salesforce, but depending on how they've created the field, they might have mapped it to where the salesperson can also resubscribe them, which you shouldn't do it that way. But I've seen it happen at multiple clients back in my agency days. So the suspend feature, and the reason I like the kill it with fire approach is it protects you against both. Because a salesperson wouldn't have the ability to unmarketing suspend somebody.
Cool. Any other quick tips before we finish?
Something about the cookies on your site and updating your privacy policy, preference center, that kind of thing. I think everybody now has like that banner on their site just about now that says see your privacy.
Full transparency is my big advice on what you're doing with the data. Just document how it's being used, and at least you're being straightforward. There's no surprises.
I think another process that gets forgotten, because we're so focused on the checkbox and opt-in and opt-out, is kind of like two like side things, which is one, when someone asks you what data they have on, like what data do you have on me, what is the process of having that mapped out with legal beforehand, so when you get that request, you're not scrambling trying to figure out what to give them, who's supposed to give it and what information you're supposed to give them, and then the right to be forgotten, right? So we just got a request today, hey, please remove all information, like I want you to delete me out of your database. What is the process? How do I prove that you've been deleted? How do I prove that you say who you are? Like what legal documentation before I show you and delete your data? So having all that mapped out really helped too, because when you get those requests, you can go ahead and fulfill those.
Okay, so I guess having kind of a little checklist of we maybe don't want to do all of these straight away. Like we might want to start off with the checkbox, and then we're going to do the privacy thing, and then we have our processes. And maybe for those who aren't necessarily have to be GDPR compliant right now, but maybe need to be in the future, start working through those things, all those little things, and then hopefully it's not quite so much of a pain in the backside when it comes to it.
Okay. And just one thing there I want to put in is if you can get more data, you know, not everyone records the IP address, you should be. But the IP address, the page, the form, things like that, where you're getting that explicit opt-in, whether it's Castle, GDPR in this case, or otherwise, you want to get that so you have that trace log that you can go back to rather than having to dig through individual records, but actually make a field on your record that brings it to the forefront.
Cool. Okay.
And the best advice you can have at all is to get a lawyer.
Yeah, get a legal team. Okay, so I think that answered all of my questions. If anyone's got anything else to add, if not, we can finish. And I think we're pretty much bang on 30 minutes as well. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to do a blog post, I'm not going to do a GDPR blog post. I'm going to do a small post on this, and then we'll get it up on community and hopefully shared out so everyone can see it. And thank you for anyone who either is watching now or who watches at a later date. Thank you, everyone. Bye.